then the Alter Rebbe brings it to another level.
Right. So we're gonna continue to develop that today. Yeah, so, okay. Good morning. We missed you yesterday. Your absence was noted. What was the issue? Okay, and you record your pressed on the car?
Oh yeah, I started from before.
Yeah?
It's still waiting. Give it 1 more minute.
Okay.
See him. He's working for me. Yeah. It's working. Okay. I have it in mind.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Bruchim Abayim, welcome back. We'll continue the third shiur in Basi Lagani Tavshin Chaf Aleph, which is the maimer that was said by the Rebbe 60 years ago, 1961, 5721, Friday night before Baruch, before Kegavna, which was Mitzay Yud Shvat, the night of Shabbos B'Shalach, Friday night B'Shalach, the night of Yud Aleph Shvat. In this kuntras, we are up to the end of page Yud Dalet on the top, right? Page Yud Dalet on the top, the fourth paragraph, Dalet, if Dalet. Yeah, Vihine. Those of you who are watching online, make sure you download your source sheets so you could follow inside. If you go to theyeshiva.net, you'll see on top of the video, Basi Lagani number 3, there should be an icon download. And over there you have the source sheet.
Yeah, that's where it is.
Page 7.
No.
You got that from the computer? From the computer. So from your source sheets, it's page 7. It says on the top, V'hine be'inyan Hashemas, right? V'hine be'inyan Hashemas. Okay. To give a summary from last week's class, will be another couple of days or hours. But Rabbi Aaron asked for a 3-sentence summary? 3 sentences, okay?
One for the Ari, one for the Baal Shem Tov.
One for the Balatanya. Very good. And the truth is, if you can't summarize something in 3 sentences, then you can't summarize it at all. And the truth is, last week we learned that piece of Hayom Yom Yud Aleph Tishrei, right? Which actually summarizes it literally in 3 sentences. I just thought about it. That Mitzvah Yom Kippur, Tov Kuf Nun Vav, the night after Yom Kippur, the Mitzvah Yom Kippur of the year, Tov Kuf Nun Vav, which would be 1795. The Alter Rebbe comes out and he says a short Torah on the pasuk, Mi kashem alekeinu b'chol kareinu elav. Right, Moshe Rabbeinu says, you have it here in the source sheets on page 1. Who is a great nation that Hashem is so close to him? Like our God, whenever we call out to him, again, a love twice in the same pasuk. So Chazal say, a love Eloi l'midos, call out to him and not to his midos. Which means you could think that when you talk to him, you may be addressing his midos, his attributes, his characteristics, his features, so to speak. So Chazal say, Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, call out to him, a love Eloi l'midos, not to his midos. So the Alter Rebbe says, what does this mean? So the Pardes, written by the Ramak, Rabbeinu Moshe Cordovero, like let's remember he passed away 1570 in Svas. He writes the book Pardes Rimonim, among many Svarim. He wrote a very famous Musar Sefer called Toimer Dvoira. That's him, yeah, that's the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. The palm tree of Dvoira, the Toimer Dvoira. The That's about applying the 13 attributes of mercy to a person's life. Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. Talmud Dvorah. Yeah, he wrote a very famous sefer called Elima. He wrote various svarim in Kabbalah. But the Pardes is the most famous, and so Alter Rebbe says, the Pardes says, what's a love? A love is the Oiris HaMeslabshem Bekelim the Esespheres Datzilis. We explained this at length, right? That the Pardes says that a love is, don't look at the vessels, don't get stuck in the vessels, in the containers, which is the source of characteristics, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. No, a love. You're speaking to Hashem himself, and that's the energy, the divine energy that infuses the vessels, that gives life and vitality, divine vitality to the vessels. That's what you're referring to, because that oir is undefined, it's not differentiated, it's pure infinity. That's the light of the Ein Sof. That's what the Pardes says, I love Eloy Lemidaisav. The challenge with that, the missing piece is, so why are there different names? The different names, why do we call Hashem when we're speaking to different names? Right? Speak to Yud Kei Vav Kei to Aleph Daled Nun Yud to Yud Kei to Tzvayis to Shin Daled Yud Hatei Elekai Oznecho Ushma Pkachei Nechorei Ad Neshma Ad Neslicha. Or to put it differently, since as the Arizal explains, the names are only the Kalim, the Oir is always Shem Havai Yud Kei Vav Kei. Right? So we're only speaking to Yud Kei Vav Kei. So why are there different names by which we call him and identify him and daven to? So this is where Alter Rebbe brought in the Baal Shem Tov's idea. What does the Baal Shem Tov teach? The Baal Shem Tov teaches that a love is the elikus versus in the kalim the esespheres datzilis. It's the godliness that's in the vessels of esespheres datzilis. Now it's literally one sentence summation, but for this, the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe explains this idea from the Baal Shem Tov in Likkutei Torah, Parshas Bahar, and Vayikra, in a few places, that there's a concept in Kabbalah called the Oir of the Kav and the Oir of the Rishimu. Right? This was the meat of the Shir last week. That post-Tzimtzum, there's the Kav, which is the infinity that gets reintroduced into the empty space. But in addition to that, the Arizal teaches there's the Rishimu, the residue, the Roshim, the residue of the original infinite light that never left the empty space. And the idea of that is Koyach HaBligvul and Koyach HaGvul. The Kav represents the infinite expression. Rishimu represents infinity, also includes the capacity for finite expression. That never was a contradiction with the world because it's the capacity for finite, so there was no tzimtzum in that. And that's the shirish of Kalim. The shirish of Oir comes from the Kav. The shirish of Kalim comes from Rishimu. In Rishimu there was no tzimtzum at all. And in that sense, the Kalim's shirish is from Ein Sof, but from which element? From the Koyach HaGvul, which is really one with the Koyach HaBligvul. So the Baal Shem Tov says that a love, what's the love? The love is to the Oir in the Keli. What does it mean, the Oir in the Keli? Not the Oir that infuses the Keli. The Oir of the Keli itself. That the Gvul of the Keli comes from the Rishimu, which is Koyach HaGvul. The Oir in the Keli, that's what the Pardes spoke about. That's the infinity of the Kav. The Baal Shem Tov was Megala, the Oir in the finiteness itself, the Keli itself, not the Oir that infuses the Keli. And the interesting proof of the Baal Shem Tov he brought is, it says in Zohar, that when the Oir leaves the Keli, it remains like a body without a soul. We say it in Pasach Eliyahu, those who say Erev Shabbos, Pasach Eliyahu, from the introduction of the Tikkun Zohar. The whole piece, Pasach Eliyahu v'Amar, right? A Torah of Eliyahu Hanavi about the spheres. So he says there, V'chad antistalik minayu ishtari kulik agufa b'la nishmasa. When you, Hashem, leave the Kalim, the spheres, they remain like a body without a soul. They remain like corpses. He says, 1 second, they don't remain like, there's nothing left. It shouldn't be like a body. When a soul leaves a body, at least for a while, there's a body without a soul. The body is not alive, but there's something, there's matter, right? Just like a rock exists, it's not alive in that sense, but the body has its own energies until it decomposes. And even then it becomes part of the nutrients of the soil. So he says, when you leave, when the earth leaves the keli, there's nothing left. So from the Baal Shem Tov proved for me, no, it's like a guf without the neshama, meaning it doesn't have the oir inside of it, but it has its own chiyus, it has its own dynamic, because the keli itself, not just the oir in the keli, comes from the koyach hagvul, and that's they love Eloy Lemidaisav.
It's not created and sustained by the earth.
Right. The keli is not created and sustained by the oir, right? It has its own independent divine source. Yeah. The oir, of course, is like the neshama in the guf, right? It gives it content, it gives it chiyus, it gives it theme. But the keli itself has its own shirish. That's like the shirish of the guf itself outside of the neshama. So that's the second pshat. A love Eloy Midaisav is what? The Ein Sof in the keli itself. That's the next step. So that's why you could speak to the 7 shemus. We speak to the 7 shemus because we're speaking to the 7 kelim, but not to the keli, to the love of the keli, to the Ein Sof of the keli. Yeah. That was the nekuda. That was the. Now I know this is complicated stuff and it seems very, very mystical. But I think last week we tried to explain it, bring it down somewhat, show the ramifications in life. The koyach habligvul, the koyach hagvul, the Ramak, the Baal Shem Tov. And then the Alter Rebbe himself says, and the simple meaning is, this is the Ramak is Oyer, the Baal Shem Tov is Ken. The simple meaning is, a love is Hashem himself. Atzmus Ein Sof, which exists by every single simple Jew with an inherent knowledge, Yediyah Atzmus, it's an innate awareness, and Amunah Pshuta. He says 2 things, Yediyah Atzmus, innate knowledge, and Amunah Pshuta. There's things that you know from outside information. And then there's Yediyah Atzmus, it's just an innate experience of knowledge and simple faith. And that's the Krevim Elav, B'chol Kareinu Elav, Atzmus HaNeshama, connecting with Atzmus Ein Sof. The Atzmus of the Neshama with Atzmus Ein Sof. That's what Alter Rebbe explained in Elav Eloi L'Midaisav.
Why does it have different names? Why do we use different names?
So you're saying, why are there names? It's just Atzmus, the B'chol no names. Like the Baal Shem Tov, you say the Shemus HaGeshmak, because it's even in the Keli. Even in the Keli, you're speaking to the Koyach HaGvul, to the Ein Sof of the Koyach HaGvul. The same question like the Ramak, right? So why are there names? Shouldn't be names. Yeah. And even deeper than the Ramak, at least the Ramak is talking about Oir, and he says it's beyond Oir, it's Atzmas. Okay, so we'll see, that's a good question. We'll see soon. Now let's get to the next step. So this is the Teichen, the summation of Seif Gimel of the Maimer. Now let's continue Seif Dalet. It would seem like he's going a little off subject, but not quite. V'hinei be'inyan hashemus amru razal. When it comes to the shemus, when it comes to the general theme of Hashem's names, there's an interesting statement that the Chazal tell us in Masechta Pesachim Daf Nun Amar Aleph. Loi kashani nichtev ani nikra. Nichtev ani biyud hey havaya. V'nikra ani ba'alev dalad adna. Alev dalad nun yud. This is a fascinating piece of Gemara in Pesachim. I think it's the end of the 4th chapter, Daf Nun. The last element of the chapter. The Gemara says, we say it in Aleinu every day, V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. B'yoyim hahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shma echad. That when Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to be one, and His name is going to be one. Asks the Gemara, Atu ha'idn elav shma echad. Hashem's name is not one now. We say, then His name, we say it every day, right? In Aleinu 3 times a day. His name is going to be one, and now His name is not one. What does it mean? So the Gemara says that yes, now His name is not one. There's a duality, there's a split. Because now Hashem says, not the way the way that I'm written is not the way that I'm pronounced. And the way that I'm pronounced is not the way that I'm written. When we write Hashem's name, yeah, it's usually Yud, and then a Hey, and then a Vav, and then a Hey. But how do we say it? When you see those letters, you don't say Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, you say Hashem, Adna, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, right? Adna, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. In other words, the way I'm written is not the way I'm pronounced. The way I'm pronounced is not the way I'm written. So there's some split, there's some issue here. There's like I don't want to use the word, but it's like a split personality, so to speak. There's some dichotomy here, there's a dissonance. So the name is not one. There's the way you write the name, and there's the way you say the name. When Mashiach comes, by Yom Hahu, v'haya by Yom Hahu, yiyeh Hashem echad, u'shmoi echad. At last, His name will be one. Kashem shani nichtev kach ani nikra. That's what the Gemara says in Pesachim. The Gemara tells a story there that Rava decided that he wants to heal the situation. So he said he's going to give a shiur how to say Hashem's name, how to say Yud Kei Vav Kei, how to pronounce it correctly, and explain it. Explain the meaning of it. And it says an old man came to him and said, he said 3 words, Zeh Shmi La'olam. In Parsha Shmois that we read yesterday, Moshe asks Hashem, the Jews are going to ask me, what's your name? What should I tell them? So Hashem says, Eyesh, Eka, Shereka, I'll be who I'll be. Then he says, tell them that their God, the God of their father, sent you. Zeh Shmi La'olam v'zeh Zichri L'dar v'dar. This is my name forever, and this is the way to mention me for generations. La'olam is spelled without a vav. Because it's spelled without a vav, and there's no nekudus in a Sefer Torah, you could read it Zeh Shmi La'olam from the word helam, concealment. This is my name to be concealed. Not this is my name forever. So this Gemara says, this old man, Ahu Sava, doesn't say his name. Some Rishonim say when it says in Gemara, an old man, it refers to Eliyahu. But the Gemara doesn't say the name. An old man told Rav, Zeh Shmi La'olam. The name has to be concealed. It's written that way, but don't give a shiur about it. So Rava canceled the plans. There was no shiur. It's an interesting story. And then the Gemara says, what pshat Zeh Shmi La'olam v'zeh Zichri L'dar v'dar. Here you see, if this is my name, then this is how you're going to mention me, right? You don't say, my name is Nehemiah, so when you want to call me, say Nehemiah. Obviously, if your name is Nehemiah, or your name is Levi, or your name is Nachem, or your name is Aaron, or your name, whatever it is, right? David, Matel, Shloimeh, so that's how I'm going to call you. Why does Hashem say, this is my name, and this is how you mention me? So you see, clearly, it's not so simple. This is my name, but mentioning me got to be different. There's Shmi and there's Zichri. And the Shmi is La'olam, the Shmi is La'olam. So Gemara says, the way I'm written is not the way I'm pronounced. 2 separate things. Now, this obviously has to be understood. It's your name or it's not your name. And if it's your name, you say, this is my name, but don't call me by this name. Right? We know when people do that, right? This is my name for private life. This is my name for business. There's an old Durok why Yisri had 7 names. It says Yisri had 7 names because he had to marry off 7 daughters. Right? Each time he declared bankruptcy. So Mele, everything went on a different name. You had to change the name.
I thought that Yud Kei Vav Kei, we don't pronounce it as it's written,
right?
Because of some kind of respect or power that it has. That
right. So that's going to be the theme. What is a taka? We write it, right? In Sefer Torah, write Yud and Hey. And of course, we sometimes write other names like Elokim or Tzva. Right? We write other names also. The beginning of Parshas Va'era, Vaydaber Elokim El Moshe, Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. Right? So you have the Elokim and Hashem. But when the Baal Koda is going to read it Shabbos, or tomorrow, he's going to say Vaydaber Elokim El Moshe, Vayomer Elav Ani. He's not going to say Yud Kei Vav Kei. He's going to say Ani, Adai, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. And the same is true in the next pasuk. Va'era Lavram Elitzak Val Yaakov, Bekel Shin Daled Yud. That we're going to pronounce. Bekel Shakai Ushmi. He's not going to say Yud Kei Vav Kei, Shmi, Yud Hei Vav. He's going to say Shmi. Adna, again, Adna. Here we see constantly the whole Chumash. Wherever you read, the whole Tanakh. If it says Yud Kei Vav Kei, everybody knows there's a code. Do not say this. I have a different name. What's the message? And because of that, Hashem says, my name is not one. My name is split. There's a split in my name. B'yom hahu, hi Hashem echad Shema echad. And then the question is, what's going to happen that day that the name finally, the 2 names will make peace, that will be able to pronounce that which is written. Kashem shani nichtav kachani nikra. Umevayir hamagid. So for this, there's a gewaldige Torah from the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich, of course, is the successor of the Baal Shem Tov and the Rebbe of the Baal Tanya, of the Alter Rebbe. When the Baal Shem Tov passed away, Shvu was 1760. Baal Shem Tov was born 1698 and he passed away 1760. So he lived around 200 years after the Ramak, because the Ramak passed away 1570. The Arizal passed away. You're going to be tested on all these dates, so you better listen. The Arizal passed away 2 years later, 1572. Shin Lamed Beis. The Baal Shem Tov was born 1698 and he passed away 1760. So it's approximately 2 centuries after the Ramak and the Arizal. 150 years, 200 years after that. When he passed away, his student, his disciple, the Rabbi, the Maggid of Mezrich, who lived in Mezrich in Ukraine, succeeds him 1 year later. The first year was his son, and then it went over to the Maggid. Yeah. So the Maggid wasn't for a long time. Maggid was 12 years. He passed away. Yutas Kislev Tovkov Lamed Gimel, 1772. Moshe passed away 1760, passed away 1770. So the Maggid has a Torah on this. The Maggid says as follows. He says, Shem Havaya hu Shem HaMefirish. Chazal tell us in Masechta Saita that Shem Havaya is called Shem HaMefirish. Shem HaMefirish means the Shem HaMefirish is the ineffable. I think they say, right? Ineffable tetragrammaton, if you want the English words. Shem HaMefirish means that name of Hashem that is considered the explicit name, the most revealed name. Ulamayla Yosef Shem HaEtzem. Deeper, it's called Shem HaEtzem, which means the essential name of Hashem. It's like the intimate, real, authentic, like his etzem, like if you want to describe who he is Shem Havayut Kevavke. That's an expression of the Kesef Mishnah, Hilchas Avodah Zarah. Shehu lamayla mikol hahaviyos. And this is beyond all existences. Haviyos from the word haya, hoiva, v'yiyah. Something that is called hoiva, it exists. Sharehu mahaves hakol. Because he brings everything into existence. So therefore, this transcends any existence that exists. It even transcends the very definition of existence, because it brings in all forms of existence, including the definitions of existence, the fact that something is in a way that we can relate to it on some level, spiritual or physical. The inyan hakriya, when you pronounce something, when you call out, kaire, hu inyan hagili v'aperson, it's always publicity. Pronouncing words, uttering words is PR. It's a PR, it's communication. When I say something, I'm bringing it out, I'm articulating it, I'm defining it. That's what speech is. So therefore it's an inherent impossibility, it's a paradox to pronounce him as Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's not a name that can be pronounced. Why? Because it's impossible that which transcends all forms of existence should be able to be articulated and revealed in the worlds. Because by definition, you're talking here about something that is undefined. How do you talk about something that's undefined? Tell me, how do you talk about it? You can't. The moment you talk about it, you're already not talking about it. You're talking about your version of it. So you have to have that humility to say, this I can't talk about. I can't even talk about the fact that I can't talk about it. You cannot pronounce it, because what you're pronouncing is already not it. What you're pronouncing is the way you perceive it, the way you articulate it, the way you define it, the way you understand it. Even if you're saying it's something that is beyond me, right? But I'm trying to describe something that is beyond me, so I'm giving it words. I'm giving it some form of packaging, some form of even if it's very abstract and very transcendental. So therefore, it's a Shem Havaya, just don't pronounce it.
Why are we giving it a pronunciation that's obviously not accurate?
Oh,
what does it help us?
so why? So don't pronounce anything. Very good. So he continues. The Maggid continues. Well, Mashem is Galaboilamus, but there is something that comes out in the worlds from Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the key, and that's Shem Adna. What's Shem Adna? The word Aleph Daled Nun Yud means my master. Right? We say Adon Olam Asher Malach. Right? Adon Olam, the ruler, the master of the world. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. Hashem Malach B'terem Kol Yitzur Nivra. So he says Shem Adna is P'chinas HaMalchus. The Ein Melech B'lo Yam. There's no leader without a people. Famous expression of Rabbeinu Bechaya in Vayeshev and other Svarim, like he brings in 32. There's no king without a nation. Ve'ein adain b'lo avadim. And there's no master without subjects, without servants. Yeah, just like there's no husband without a wife, there's no wife without a husband. In other words, there are certain identities in life that warrant a relationship. You can't say, I'm married to whom? To myself. Some people try to say that, right? That's when they end up in your office. By definition, there is otherness, right? You could do a lot of things on your own. You can be a poet on your own. Right? You can climb to the top of the Himalayas and wax eloquently about the beauty of the world, no question. You can go to the forest and meditate for many years. But a person says, I'm married, by definition, what does that mean? By definition, it means there's somebody else in your life who impacts you and you impact them. Somebody says, I'm a leader. What does it mean I'm a leader? Leader doesn't mean I sit in my room and I decide in my mind how the world should run. A leader means I'm in a relationship with it. I take responsibility. I take responsibility for others. Ein melech b'lo yam. You can't be a leader, you can't be a melech if there's no people. There's no adain b'lo yavadim, right? You say, I'm heading an initiative, I'm heading a company, but I like to be isolated. That's fine, but it's just a different relationship. So he says, when you talk about Hashem as an adain, here there's otherness. Hashem can't be an adain, he can't be a melech. There's no relationship, right? There's no. So therefore, he says, because of this quality that Hashem chose, the quality of Adna, this is what creates worlds. This is what creates a reality of otherness. If Hashem didn't want to be a melech, if he didn't want to be an adon, if he didn't want to be married, so to speak, he didn't want to be in a relationship. So there's no otherness. Einayid Malvadi. There's just him, pure infinity, undefined infinity, right? We spoke last week at length about the tzimtzum. What was the idea of the tzimtzum? The tzimtzum is creating an empty space for you to exist. We spoke about the ring by marriage, right? What's the ring? The ring is that tzimtzum. You create an empty space for otherness. If you don't want in a relationship, then you could fill everything. It's fine. Be pre-creation, Eirein Seif, Memale, Kol Makam Hachol, in the words of the Arizal. The light of infinity fills the entire space. So it's the name Adna. When we say the name Adna, what do we mean? It's the Adna, I mean Aleph Daled Nun Yud, right? You understand? You're getting used to my pronunciation. It means this. It's a metaphor of saying this desire of Hashem to be in this relationship is what creates worlds. This is what is responsible for the reality of you and me and every single world. Because Adna. Yeah.
Wait a second. So I understand what we're trying to portray when we say the word Aleph Daled Nun Yud, but I don't understand what that has anything to do with that what we're replacing the name of Yud Kevavke. It's not at all the same thing.
So you're saying, why are you replacing Yud Kevavke? It's b'chal not the same thing.
That's the only thing you could use, but how is
Don't say that it's Yud Kevavke. It's not a substitute. It's not a substitute. Don't call him a substitute. Say you're hiring another element. Okay, good question. 1 minute. Let's see weiter. There's an am in order for there to be a melech, and there's avodim in order for there to be an adon. And the word on eved, the word avoidus Hashem, comes from the word eved, right? Avdus, eved. And that's a chiddush. Don't take that for granted. We hear the word eved, we hear slave, and slavery is never a praiseworthy thing in our culture, our consciousness. We praise Lincoln for emancipating the slaves. But let's think about it. The first definition of an eved, let's call him a servant or even an employee, is that you need him. That he does something for you, right? You don't hire people that you don't need, hopefully. I mean, there are companies maybe who do that, but you just get hired and you stay for life, certain jobs. But the concept of an eved is that there's something, I need an extra pair of hands, I need a mind, I need your talent, I need your creativity. That's why I'm hiring you. You can do something that I can't do. So when you say that Hashem wants us to be avodim, that's a very big statement. That means I could serve him. In other words, I can do something for the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's a big thing. That's a big one. Va'avad, don't take it for granted. Va'avad means you serve him. When somebody serves me, when somebody serves you, they're actually providing you with a need that you don't have on your own. So this avodas Hashem, it's a chiddush. It's a chiddush to be an eved Hashem. The chiddush is that there's a serious relationship. I need you, and you need me. There's a very deep kinship. It's like in a marriage. The husband serves the wife serves the husband. Hopefully they both serve each other. I don't know if the word is serve, but I need you, you need me.
But the word to work.
Work, yeah, evet, yeah. So that could only come mitzad Shem Adna. Shem Adna means, so to speak, the way God's infinity defines itself, compresses itself within some form of limitation, at least perceived limitation, to allow for the existence of otherness, an eved and an am. V'zeu shamru, this is pshat, shema shenikra hainu inyan hagiluhu b'shem adna. So this means that the way he's written is not the way he's pronounced. The way he's pronounced is the name Adna, not Yud Kei Vav Kei. Shezeu klolus ha'or ha'shayich lo'olam, because this is the light that's relatable to the worlds. And in this itself, you have all the other 7 names. You have all the 7 names, which you're not allowed to erase. Shem Kel b'Chesed. There's the name Kel, which represents Chesed. Shem Elokim b'Gvura v'Chuli. Yud Kei Vav Kei is Tiferes. Netzach and Hoyd is Tzvayis. Shem Tzvayis b'Netzach Hoyd. Shin Daled Yud is Yisoid. Aleph Daled Nun Yud is Malchus. Elei Ka is Bina. Eya is Keser. The 7 names are related to this. What is the Maggid teaching us here? And this answers your question, Levi. Of course we want to talk about Yud Kei Vav Kei, but he's saying, I want you to realize when you talk about Yud Kei Vav Kei, you're talking about Adna. That's the Vart. We want to talk about Yud Kei Vav Kei. But the moment you address Yud Kei Vav Kei, just realize that what you're talking about is Aleph Daled Nun Yud. It's the humility to understand that what I'm experiencing, what I'm touching, what I'm describing, what I'm trying to have a relationship with is something that's relatable to my identity. Just from the very fact that I want to be in touch with you, that I want to describe it, I want to connect to it. So yes, we're looking at Yud Kei Vav Kei. But just realize there's a duality, because the way you're talking about it is already describing something that is somewhat relatable to you, or what he calls here in the Oasis of Chassidus, Oir HaShayich La'olamus. Oir HaShayich La'olamus means divine energy, the way it's relatable to existence. In that itself, there are infinite levels. You know, how deep your consciousness, how deep you're connecting to it. But the common denominator is, it's Oir HaShayich La'olamus. It's already a light that's relatable to some form of identity. And that's the chiddush of Adna. If there wouldn't be the Shem Adna, just Yud Kei Vav Kei, there would be no otherness, there would be no I. There would be no way of articulating the experience. God would be who Hashem would be who Hashem is. Even our name, we call him Hashem. What's Hashem? Hashem means the name. Well, I call you the name. What you're trying to say is, all I can talk about is your name, which is what a name is. What's a name? A name is the way I perceive you, the way I articulate you. Whenever we talk about my perception, when it says when somebody talks about somebody else, he's not really talking about that person. He's talking about himself, which is a very true statement, right? If I'm talking about you, I'm not talking about you. What do I know about you? I'm talking about me. Or in other words, I'm talking about you the way you're filtered through me. And what if I'm full of issues? Right? So you become full of issues. We all know that. If I'm in a relationship with you and I have a lot of issues, I don't have the issues, I'm good. You have the issues. So who am I talking about? I'm telling you, this guy has issues. Really. Yeah. Right? They say you point a finger at somebody simultaneously. What are you doing? You're pointing 3 fingers at yourself. Yeah. In Yiddish, there's an expression, shiltzich. When you say somebody curses, shiltzich, he's cursing himself. He's not cursing himself, he's cursing somebody else. He's really cursing himself. Yeah. The Baal Shem Tov says everything is a mirror. Everything is a mirror. And it's so true. I'm not talking about, whoever talks about anybody else. You talk about yourself. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. A real pure person sees purity everywhere. Because you're pure, right? In other words, everything is projections. This is a very profound idea. That's what a name is. A name is, I talk about you from my perception of you. Now, how much can I perceive? Some people perceive more, some people perceive less. Some people you allow into your life, right? But even you yourself, when you talk about yourself, how much do you perceive of yourself? How much percent of you do you know?
Not enough.
The problem is the moment you go to knowing, right? Knowing filters out 99%. What your conscious brain knows about yourself is a very small part of who you are. It's the way I'm processing myself to myself. It's called your conceptualized self. That's your name. The way you think about yourself is already your name. And that's much deeper than anybody else knows. What people know is the name of the name and the name of the name of the name. There's a medrash that says there's who you are, there's who you think you are, and there's who other people think you are. And the 3 are not the same. The question is, can we create fusion? That's the question. Can we create fusion? Because all relationships begin with going beyond the name. Can I go deeper than the name? Bayom Ahu Yiyeh. Bayom Ahu Yiyeh. Yeah.
It covers there's transparency in a way.
Right. Yeah. So the first level is honesty. The first thing is for me to be able to be open. But I have to also be able to have tools to be able to be open, because sometimes my conceptualized self doesn't allow me to see who I am. I get stuck in my name. And I live in my name. I don't live in me. I live in my name. So that's what the Maggid is saying. We always have to have that humility in life to be able to say, I know you. I'm not sure I know you. I know what I'm feeling from you, which is about me. I know what I'm experiencing from you. And by the way, this is a very, very powerful way of communicating in all close communication, especially, for example, in a marriage. Right? When you tell your wife, or you tell your husband, or you tell your husband, or you tell your wife. There are men sitting in this room, that's why I'm pointing there. You tell your wife, you are so and so, or you're XYZ, or what you said was, right, obviously critical. It's usually, very often it backfires. It doesn't do well for anybody. A much more powerful way of communicating is don't talk about the other person, talk about yourself. You could say, what you said yesterday at the Shabbos table, I want to tell you how I felt about it. So instead of talking about what you did, you were obnoxious, you were rude, you're self-centered, you're narcissistic, you're meshuggah, you're kvetch, you're insecure, you have an ego from here to China, you have your mother's qualities, your grandmother's qualities, whatever it is. That's on a good day. On a bad day, the words may be different, right? Don't go there. Because then it becomes, and let me talk about you. Let me talk about you. Rather, I say, I just want to say what you said yesterday. I want to describe to you my experience of it. First of all, it's much better for communication because I'm not attacking you, but it's much deeper than this. It's actually truer. It's a much truer way of talking. I don't know what happened. All I know is what I felt. I may be, right, tuning into something very real, maybe tuning into something within my own system, maybe it was completely about me. We're not even getting into exactly, who's guilty, who's not guilty.
They're going to say, that's not what I said.
Okay. But if if we have a relationship, you can respect the fact that this is what I heard what you said, or this is how it felt. And then I could respect your feedback to me. But that's how real communication happens. And it's much more real, because the moment I'm talking about you and you're talking about me, we're both talking about things that we don't know. Like Kishan, I'm just trying to bring down this concept the way it applies to relationships. Of course, it's a very different thing. But everything, but Salmeinu Kid Mesenu, I don't even know my etzem. You know my etzem? I don't even know my etzem. Right? I could talk about the impact. So this is the concept here. This is just a mashal for this concept. We talk about names. What does it mean we talk about names? I can talk about your reputation, the way you're expressed. That's what Gilui means. Gilui means the way you impact me. What do I know about Hashem? Even if I know, right? I know how it impacts me. Let's say Hashem as a creator of the world, Hashem as my engine, as my soul, as my source, as my fuel, as my life force. So I know God because I know me. So I'm capturing His name. I'm capturing the way He impacts me, the way He's defined by me. So the Maggid says, just have the humility and understand. You're trying to talk about Yud Kei Vav Kei, but what are you talking about? You're talking about the Yud Kei Vav, you understand? So it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. And it's true. It's not that Adna is not true. It is true. It is true. The fact that I'm articulating a certain part of you is a certain energy that's coming from you. Right? It takes two to tango. But the vart is, there is more. And not just more, of a different qualitative measure. That's what he's saying. Okay. So that's why we say Elokim is Gvura. Kel is Chesed. What does it mean Elokim is Gvura? It means the name Elokim is the way you capture and identify divinity through the experience of Gvura. Is that true? It's true, but is it all the truth? It's not all the truth. Hashem has Gvura. Hashem expresses through Gvura. Hashem expresses through Chesed. Hashem expresses through Tiferes. And that Tzvayus is real, but the Maggid is saying, Loik Hashem Shani Nichtav Ani Nikra, that which you're pronouncing, it's not capturing Yud Kei Vav Kei.
So if you want to try to articulate a name that captures it, you're going to end up not the words, and end up capturing Mal, using a name of Malchus to try to capture the
Oh,
essence.
so whenever you want to capture Yud Kei Vav Kei, somehow it's going to be filtered through Adna, through Malchus, the relationship. It's always going to be filtered. That's why we don't say Ani Nikra Tzva'is. It's always going to be filtered through Malchus. Because Malchus is that quality, Kivayachal and Hashem, which warrants, it's behind the very fact of a relationship. Hashem wanted to be in a relationship. I want you. That's the prerequisite for you experiencing me. That's the prerequisite for it. I wanted you and you to experience me on some level. So it's always filtered through Shem Adna. That's why the Gemara says the way I'm written is not the way I'm pronounced. And it's right away important to know that. Don't think that your description of it captures the full essence. It also makes you stuck. There's no room for growth. There's no curiosity. There's no inquisitiveness. There's room for growth. The moment I know who you are, it's the end of the relationship. And I think in marriages we see this very, very powerfully. The moment you know who your husband is or your wife is, it's the end of the relationship. Like, I already know you, you're in a box. No. A relationship means I actually don't know you. There's inquisitiveness, there's curiosity. I know a lot and I experience a lot, but there's always room for the mystery. And that's very deep, it's very deep. People who already know, I know what you're thinking, I know who you are, it's actually the end of the relationship. If you don't know who I am, there's a relationship. You know why? Because you're actually connecting to me. Because the first prerequisite to connect to me is confessing ignorance, confessing curiosity. The moment you know who I am means you know nothing about me. Because there is something that's unknowable in a person. Vayivaser Yaakov levadai. There's an element of levadai. Your typhus?
Stifling. The one way is stifling.
Stifling, yeah. I stifle you, I stifle me. And it usually comes from anger. It comes from frustration.
Questions? No, not questions.
Yeah.
Kendall, go.
So what if he learns about the pasuk by Basi Yaakov Levadi with the Rebbe's Sichon and he learns the whole meaning of Levadi? You're going to say he's not connected to the value the way Hashem.
1 second, this is the beginning. Mendel, this is the beginning. You think chassidus doesn't stop here. We want a relationship with everything.
Avai also, yeah?
Yeah, we're going to get there.
Okay.
We're going to get there.
Long time.
Yes, it's taking 5,781 years. You're right, but don't come to me. That I have to ask Hashem. I haven't been around 6,000 years ago, but it's taking a long time. Yeah. Huh? We're working on it. Bekarev. We're working on it.
Complain to the sideline.
Yeah, the old man told Rav, Zeshmi li'olam, go to him, don't come to me. Now the Maga takes us a step further.
I'm saying also in a relationship, also explain it in a relationship, how we're going to be able to get Levadi even in a relationship.
Yes, we'll try. I'm going to try, listen.
Okay, thank you.
And we remember, whatever I explain and discuss, it's still not, it's names, we talk about names. And the first way of getting beyond names is silence. It's the humility, it's the silence. That's the power of silence, the pause, right? The silence is the acknowledgement that, in other words, the fact that you're not pronouncing Yud Kei Vav Kei is already, you're closer to it. And this itself is the beginning of cultivating a humility. The moment I think I have everything, I actually have much less. Because I just reduced it to my own imagination. Okay, 1 second, let's see. Let's go further. Comes the Magid and he explains what the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos, Perik Aleph, towards the end of the first chapter, Mishnah Yud Beis Yud Gimel Hillel says, Negat Shma Avat Shma. Negat Shma means somebody who wants to make his name great, loses his name. Somebody who needs to be known everywhere by everybody, you ultimately end up destroying yourself. And I think, I guess divine providence has us learning certain things at certain days. Yeah, take an example. Alter Rebbe had a sworn enemy. His name was Napoleon. Alter Rebbe did not like Napoleon. He said Napoleon, his yeshus, his arrogance, has no bounds. It's not enough for him that in his early 30s, he literally ruled most of the world, the Bonaparte. That wasn't enough. He had to take Russia also. And that was the mistake. That was his catastrophic error in 1812. In June 1812, Yud Beis Tammuz, when he invaded, he crossed the river into Vilna, Lithuania. He came from Paris and he came from the west and he invaded Russia. He thought the Tsar will surrender, and he didn't know the Russians. He also didn't realize how large Russia is. Russia doesn't have to surrender, they just retreat. Because Russia doesn't end. Russia has 11 time zones. You just go back. It was Napoleon. It was the end of Napoleon. That was it. 1812. He lost everything. The Gemara, there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says in Masechta Saita, those who wanted everything ended up with nothing. Haman needed Mordechai to bow down to him. He ended up with nothing. Negad Shema. If you need your name to be everywhere, Negad means it's expanded. It's nimshach. It's great. Everybody knows it. You'll ultimately lose it. It's not going to work. It's too much narcissism. You have to have limits. Negat shma avat shma. This is the Mishnah. Comes the Maggid and says, in a very daring interpretation, that there's something much deeper the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is saying that this actually happened. You know what it happened to? It happened to Hashem. What's pshat? So he says, the b'chdei sheyeh negat shma, Hashem wanted his name to expand. He wanted that there should be the gili of Einaid Malvadai. Negad Shema, Negad Meloshin Hamshacha. Negad, in Aramaic, Negad means something that's communicated, that's drawn down. Showinyan Hamshacha v'agili d'shem Adna. Hashem wanted there should be the relationship, that the oneness of divinity should be felt and experienced in the whole world. Hinezel al yidei avat shema. This came because he lost his name. Showinyan Helam Shem Havaya Shaz Dafkev Shaliyas Agili the Shem Adna. For there to be Negachma, there had to be Avatshma. He had to lose Kivayachal Yutke Vavke for there should be able to be the Gili of Adna. Because the Gili of Elikus, by definition, means tailoring yourself to the structures of existence. So for this, Havaya had to be concealed. That's the concept of the Tzimtzum. Yudke Vavke, which is absolute, divine, undefined infinity, had to be forfeited, it had to be lost. Avatshma. The Rebbe says to the Maggid, we can go a step further and possibly explain the meaning of Avatshma. Avatshma is very aggressive words, brutal words. Avatshma means he lost his name. Avatshma means basically you destroy your name. I understand Hashem had to conceal Yudke Vavke. Yudke Vavke is concealed in the process of existence. I got that. But Avatshma, the name is lost. So he says, the B'chdei sheyev shli some shachas klolos rashayich loylamus showing in shemadna hutzrich li is tchilat tzimtzum harishin shu b'derech siluk v'zel loshen avat shemoed al siluk ha'er legamri. For there to be the oir that's relatable to the worlds, which is adna, there had to be for the first tzimtzum, which is defined as siluk, removal, and that's what avad is, avat shma, complete siluk. What does this mean? If you go back to the source sheets, if you remember last week we showed this you remember this page that we did? If you take a look at this picture, you have it on the source sheets, the second of the source sheets. The picture of the tzimtzum, you see this empty space. The Arizal describes that pre-creation, the Ein Ein Sof filled everything. There was no room for anything else. What happened? In order for there to be a world, Silek es Eirei Hagadol al Atzad. Where is Silek? He removed. What the Rebbe says is Avad Shma. It was lost. Lost means, so to speak, it's completely lost from this space. Why? Because if there would be even a little bit of the Ur HaBligvul, of the infinity of God in the empty space, there's no room for anything outside of the experience of Einaid Mulvada. Or in other words, for the experience of Adna. But Hashem wanted Negachma. He wanted that it should be the Gilui of Elikus within the world and within each person's heart. So for this, undefined infinity had to go into hiding. But not just into hiding, Avatshma. There has to be the siluk. From our perception, it's as though the light is completely removed. It's lost. It's not present, even though it is present. We're talking from our perception, from our experience. For there to be negachma, there had to be avachma. That's the tzimtzum harishon, the original tzimtzum that Arizal talks about. And then the kav, this line, comes back into the circle. And we also spoke about the rishimu, which never left, but that's the koyach hahelim, so that's not a contradiction, because that doesn't have to get lost, because it's koyach hagvul, it's the power of concealment, not the power of revelation. But the power of revelation had to be completely removed. That's the union of the tzimtzum. So therefore, the Maggid says, that's represented in Yud Kei Vavke. Yud Kei Vavke represents the source of everything. That source of everything is infinite and it's undefined. And it's really the source and the essence of everything. It's really the core of everything. But the moment there is to be otherness, right? Hashem has to allow that Yud Kei Vavke to, so to speak, go into hiding, avachma, and that's not going to be pronounced. What you're going to pronounce is only that which is filtered through your consciousness, even if you have the most spiritual and sublime consciousness. But the very concept of consciousness is already something that's separate, something that's I, and therefore it requires the avachma. To be negachma is avachma. For God to become public, for Hashem to express himself in the worlds, he really has to forfeit and conceal his deepest essence. He has to renounce himself for there to be otherness. Renounce his infinity for there to be otherness. Ahava de chekas es habasar. But now the Maggid continues. Was there ever a time that they pronounced Yud Kei Vavke? Says the Maggid, we all know when we say the avodah of Yom Kippur, what do? You remember? Right? Es Hashem hanichbad v'haneire, right? Yotzei mipi kohen gadol b'kedusha v'tara mefayrish mipi kohen gadol b'kedusha v'tara. So then they would kneel, yukorim, mishtachvim, v'noiflim al pneim, v'ayim baruch Hashem kved malchus l'olam vad. So Yom Kippur, the kohen gadol wouldn't say Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That's not what they heard. They heard Kohen Gadol would articulate Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. Shema Mefayrish. Like we say Mefayrish. And you hear the niggin that we sing it, right? It was an overwhelming experience. What happened? So the Maggid says, when you divest the moments, you divest yourself from the material. And the koyach haruchni in the person prevails, like the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur. Sha'azu Shabbos, and it's not just Shabbos, it's the Shabbos of Shabbos. Of Shabbos, Shekdusha Shabbos mashpia b'chol sheish yimei hamayis. A regular Shabbos, the holiness infuses all the 6 days of work. Yom Kippur transcends even Shabbos. There's no eating and there's no drinking. It says we're like angels. And the Kohen Gadol, even on a normal day, is called Kodesh Kadashim. He's separated to be holy of holies, as the pasuk says in Divrei Yamim. So you can understand the level of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Every Jew Yom Kippur is Shabbos Shabbos. The Kohen Gadol is Kodesh Kadashim even on a regular day. Az yachal lahasig chuli l'mayla me'aylam, says the Maggid. Then the Kohen Gadol can tune in to that which transcends all of existences, all the worlds. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us in Maseches Yuma, Lamed Hey, and we say it in the Avodah, then he can articulate the Shem Ha'etzem, Yud Kei Vavke, in other words, pronounce it the way it's written. That's what the Maggid says. The duality did not exist anymore. Asks the Rebbe, there's something very difficult to understand. Well, let's understand this. What is the Maggid saying? That Yom Kippur, the Ruchni prevailed over the Gashmi.
Ruchnis is also a creation.
Oh, good. You know how I know it's a good question? Because the Rebbe asks it. He's saying Ruchni doesn't help you. It gets you into a much higher place, no question. We're not minimizing Yom Kippur. But Ruchni is not getting you any... Huh?
It's not going to solve the problem.
It's not solving the problem. It's also post-Tzimtzum.
It just gets you to Adna.
It gets you to a deeper place. From being stuck in a place of complete concealment, you're more refined. You can sense more of Adna. A person who's more refined, less bruteness, less chumrius. You can sense more of your soul. Gewaldig.
Get more from the cow.
You get more of the cow, but it's all post-Tzimtzum. The problem of Tzimtzum was not to make people physical. That's not what the Tzimtzum accomplished. Ultimately, Tzimtzum accomplished to make people spiritual. It's not like the Tzimtzum turned God into physicality. Tzimtzum turned God into spirituality. Spiritual experience is as remote of infinity as physical experience. Like it says in Likkutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe often says, just like,
If anything, the opposite.
like the Alter Rebbe says, just like you can't define Hashem as physical, you can't define him as spiritual either. It's the same falsehood. Defining him as physical, nobody's going to say God is physical, that's paganism. He says to say God is spiritual is also paganism. It's a higher form of, it's also paganism. God is spiritual, was epis? That's his question. Achadayin tzarich lahavin. Maya maila bekach shazo yizgabes koyach ruchni kolosh namagen. Shaydeza yuchali is agilu d'shem avayik ksove. Harigam ruchni isu is havos. You're saying that Yom Kippur, the spiritual energy prevailed. It came out. The music of existence emerged. That's amazing, like the Maggid says. How does that allow for the Gilu Shem Havaya? Even Ruchnius is Havos. Even Ruchnius is already a product of Yudke Vovke going into the realm of existence. Vilu Shem Havaya Ulamaylam is Havos. The Maggid is saying that Yudke Vovke, in its original Shema Etzem, is Hashem in his intimate self, right? Which transcends any form of experience, even the most spiritual experience. The word Ruchnius is already not the Etzem. Just like Gashmius is not. In other words, Yom Kippur is Gewaldik. So it gets you higher. It gets you higher. So you're not on the ground, you're on the top of the mountain. But on the top of the mountain, are you closer to pure infinity than you are on the ground? You may be 30,000 miles higher than Earth, no question. You can even get into an airplane, right? And go 30,000 miles suspended over the Pacific Ocean. You're much higher, you're much grander. You can even get to the moon. That's not bad. Not bad, right? Are you closer to infinity? You're on the moon, there's certainly a nice view. I remember Sukkot Tavshin and Beis. I remember one of the sikhs that Rebbe asked a Shaila, if you're on the moon, do you have to do Kiddush Levana? And can you make a bracha Kiddush Levana if you're on the moon? It was a question. There was somebody there, Rabbi Bogod, Yosef Bogod, who was very into these types of things. So, You're touching the moon, right? Better than seeing it. So what does the Maggid mean? The Maggid is saying something. If the Maggid would say Shem Havaya is Ruchni and Shem Adna is Gashmi, okay, very geschmack. Yom Kippur is a time of Ruchni. We don't eat, we don't drink, we dress in white, we're like angels, especially the Kohen Gadol. But that's not what the Maggid says. The Maggid is saying that Negat Shema, Avat Shema, that for there to be the name of Hashem Adna, for Hashem to be an Adain, a Melech, for there to be any type of relationship, had to be Avat Shema. That Yud Kevavke had to be lost. So therefore, don't pronounce it. Don't think you got it when it was lost. It's Avat Shema. So the Rebbe says the Pshat in the Maggid is much deeper. And here we learn how things could be so counterintuitive. You know what the Ma'ila of Yom Kippur was? The Ma'ila of Yom Kippur was, he says, his Gabr is Koyach HaRuchni. If Yom Kippur was just going to a spiritual world, the Maggid would not say that. Because Ruchnis is not going to get you to that place. Yom Kippur had something else. Yom Kippur had something else. There's a halacha by Yom Kippur, the beginning of Maseches Yoma, that the Kohen Gadol had to be married. Right? V'chipper ba'adoi v'ad beisoi. So the Gemara says, from here you learn, Basi zu ishtay. He has to atone for his home, which means he has to have a home. He has to be married. And that's why they would prepare. Yeah. There's a shitta, the Mishnah, they would prepare. Opening of Masechta Yoma, Maskinin lo isha acheres. Because chas v'shalom, if something happens to his wife Yom Kippur, there's no Yom Kippur anymore. So I'm saying, Ein ladavas side, what if something happens? Okay, but the idea is, this was inherent. 1 second, now you'll ask a question. Who could be more spiritual? The bachelor or who can escape into a world of transcendence? The one who has to make ends meet and support a wife and support children, especially in the olden days? Or the person who's alone? We have in the Eastern disciplines, right? One of the biggest, that never gets married because, yeah. And we have a religion that comes from Judaism where the priest is not allowed to get married. You talk about Dalai Lama, and we understand the concept. The concept is attachments. If you're attached down here, you can't be attached up there. There's somebody's texting you, when are you coming home? No, I have to meditate for another 7 hours. I can't come home. Take out the garbage. So that's going to be the nakuda here. The word of Yom Kippur is a different word. It's punkt verkehrt. It's not that Yom Kippur there's ruchnius without gashmis. The word is mamish the opposite. The chiddush of Yom Kippur is that there is this peak of ruchnius, and yet the Kohen Gadol has to be connected below, as we will see. That already tunes into something else. Power of Yom Kippur is not that he escaped Gashmis, it's that there's a fusion of paradox. Kohen Gadol was a soul in a body. There's a neshama in a guf, which is one form of Gashmis. Even more, he had to be married. Which, as they say, marriage is a second yuridus on neshama. The neshama comes into the guf, and then marriage, like the neshama comes down all over again. Because now there's two gufim. Now you're not just married to your own body. Before you're married to your own body, that's hard enough. You got to deal with yourself. Now you're dealing with a whole other guf. So it's a new yuridus on neshama. And the Kohen Gadol, this was a halacha. And nonetheless, in this state, he is Kodesh Kadoshim, and he goes into Kodesh Kadoshim. It's not just about him; it's also the time. Yom Kippur is not a day out of the calendar; it's one of the days in the calendar. It's one of the 365 days of the year. In other words, it's part of the sequence of time. But within time, it's something that's an island in time, to the point you're not eating and drinking. We spoke about the person, we speak about time, now we speak about space. Kodesh HaKadoshim was a physical space. You walked into it. And there was an Aron there, and the Aron was a physical reality, and it had to have measurements. We learn in Parshas Truma, Masayim v'chetzi arkai. The Aron had to be the length of 2.5 amas. That's approximately 5 feet. Give or take. A little more perhaps. It had a measurement in width, in length, in length and width, and in height. Nonetheless, what does it say about the Aron? The Gemara says in Yuma, Daf Chaf Aleph, that the place of the Aron didn't have a measurement. 1 second. But if it didn't have a measurement, it wouldn't be a holy Aron, because in order for the Shekhinah to dwell in the Aron, it had to have a measurement. So it did have a measurement. If you would tell me the Aron didn't occupy space, I don't have such a problem with that. Some things don't occupy space. But you tell me it did occupy space. It was 20, there was 10 amas on each side of it was 20 amas from the Heichel, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the length was 20 amas. And that included the Aron. And then when you measured it, it was 20 amas without the Aron. So the Gemara says on this, the Makom and the not Makom work together. That's a paradox. He says, every aspect of Yom Kippur represents Not spirituality over physicality, the fusion, the chibur of two opposites. And this quality of fusing paradoxes can only come from that which we call, the Rashba says this, nimna nimnois. Nimna nimnois means he is prevented from being prevented. In other words, some philosophers, Rabbi Yosef Albo and others, argued that even Hashem, there are things that he's prevented from, which is paradox, because it doesn't make sense. Can something move clockwise and counterclockwise simultaneously? And can a miracle change that? They said no. Can 2 + 2 = 10? Sorry, miracles don't help for that. Doesn't make sense. It's rubbish, it's stupidity. This was a view in Jewish philosophy, Rabbi Yosef Albo in the Ikrim. The Rashba, Shal Setshuvas HaRashba, Chelek Aleph, Taf Yud Ches, argued, Nimna Nimnois, he's prevented from being prevented. They said, Yesh Nimnois Teva Kayim B'Chai Kabayre. Even God has limits. You can't create a rock that he can't pick up. You're talking, speak logic to me. You want to speak logic? You want to say he split the sea, fine. I could split the water in the bathtub, he could split the Red Sea. I'd have no problem. He could take me out of Egypt. He could have the water turn into blood. But to tell me, paradox, clockwise, Schrodinger's cat, you're dead and alive simultaneously. The child is older than a father? That doesn't make sense. A child can't be older than a father. Nimna nimnoyus means that mitzad etzem, logic is also created. So therefore, if logic is created, so all of the logical dictates and rules don't apply to the essence. In other words, when you say, but how, why, how and why are all parts of creation. Aloof creation, sublime, seichel is very deep. But to define the source of existence by logic, according to this idea of ninam nois, is ludicrous. That's what Shem HaEtzem means. Shem HaEtzem means the real essence is not defined by anything. It's not even defined by the fact that it's undefined. It's not defined not by transcendence and not by finiteness, not by infinity, and not even by the negation of anything, including not being afraid of paradoxes, because the reason we create paradoxes is only because of the way we perceive existence. In other words, even spirituality that lives in paradoxes and is afraid of paradoxes is not an expression of etzem. That's what happens in Yom Kippur. We thought lechatchila, what was the Maggid saying? If you get out of Gashmis and you go into Ruchnius, you can touch Yud Kei Vavke. The Rebbe says, no, Ruchnius doesn't bring you closer to Yud Kei Vavke. The Chiddush of Yom Kippur is, he goes into that world of transcendence, but he's completely connected to the physical world. How does that happen? That should tear him apart. That should destroy him. Either you're in this world or in that world. Ooh, this means that he tuned into a place of Ninam Nenoyas. This comes mitzat Shem HaEtzem. This comes mitzat Shem Havaya. And over there, finiteness and infinity don't have to be a contradiction. You said, what do you mean? It's not a contradiction. It is. Finiteness is gvul, and infinity is bli gvul. And you just said one doesn't exist with the other. Either you're here or there. That itself is a product of finite perception. Or a product of infinite perception. But it's not a product of the essence. When you talk about the etzem mamish, the core of Hashem, there should be no definition whatsoever. Not even the definition that it has to look infinite in order to be infinite. There's a halacha Yom Kippur. It says in Mishnayos, and the Rambam brings it in Hilchos Avodas Yom Kippurim, that at the end of the day, the Kohen Gadol, he finished everything. He took off his white clothes, and then he put on his gold clothes, and he took off his gold clothes. He finished the Avodah, and then it says, "Va'achar kach hayahoylech lebeisei," and then he would go home. And the Rambam brings it in as halacha in Hilchos Yom Kippurim. He would go home, and the Mefarshim ask, "What's the halacha here?" That's not the halacha. The halacha is to do the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Obviously, when he's finished, what should he do at night? He's nothing else to do. There was no avodah at night. So he goes home. You're going to tell me the halach is that he goes home and he doesn't go somewhere else? Where should he go? To the bowling alley? Where should he go? Mitzvah Yom Kippur. He came out of Kodesh HaKadoshim. Where should he go? To the pizza shop? Where should he go? To Starbucks? What do you want him to do? You want to go to an amusement park? What do you want him to do? Obviously he goes home. Where else was there to go? Right? No, the Rambam says it's a halacha. He goes home. He finished the Avodah. Do what you want. If he wants to go visit a friend, go visit a friend. You're not allowed to go visit a friend? Is he allowed to go visit his parent? The Rambam says, "Hayahoylech lebeisa." So if you say, it's just a matter of fact, he went home. So why is it in the halacha? It's a story, but it's not the halacha. So I heard from the Rebbe once, he said, it's a halacha. And in many ways, it's the deepest halacha of Yom Kippur. What happens to most people when they go into Kodesh HaKadoshim? They can't go home. They can't bring it back home. You go home and your wife says, Kohen Gadol, I know that you're in Kodesh HaKadoshim today. Could you take out the garbage? I'm out of here. I was in Kodesh HaKadoshim. Lahavda, let's take a different world. You have celebrities, right? They go to their places, they're worshipped by 100,000 people. What's the hardest thing for them? The hardest thing for them is they come home, right? And their spouse tells them what they think about them. And what do? They're gone. The relationship is over. And they don't know how to deal with it. That's why so many of them are on destructive substances, because the high, right? That energy that you feel from that there's no way to integrate it. Unless you're a very, very healthy person, a very introspective person, you have a lot of humility. Now that's even within the secular system. You're talking about Kodesh HaKadoshim. He really experienced infinity. We know that there were Kohanim Dalim who didn't survive it. The Ur was too much. It was Ur Habli Gvul. That's where the Kav shined in Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's where the Shechina was dwelling. The Tzimtzum was undone by the Kav somewhat. Now you're going to go home? The Rebbe said that's the deepest halacha. After Yom Kippur, you go home. You got to bring it into your kitchen. You got to bring it into your dining room. You got to be able to sit down on the ground and play with your children. You have to be able to connect to the real world, the concrete world of Zman and Mokim. How does that happen? How does that happen? That's the deepest halacha of Yom Kippur. And the Rebbe even said, how do you know that he was in Kodesh HaKadoshim? If he went home. If he didn't go home, he wasn't in Kodesh HaKadoshim. He was in his own spiritual trip. In other words, how do you know you touch the essence? If you fuse paradoxes. That's the only way. How is the essence translated into real life? We do live in a life of definitions. We do live in a world post-Tzimtzum. Where do we have it? The answer is you don't get stuck in Eiris and you don't get stuck in Kalim. You don't get stuck in Asiya, you don't get stuck in Atzilus. You don't get stuck in Bli Gvul, you don't get stuck in Gvul. Even Bli Gvul you can get stuck in. Now, we have to say this with respect. Getting stuck in Bli Gvul is nicht, you're talking about the essence, you're talking about holiness on the deepest levels, but it's not the essence of Kodesh HaKadosh. It's not the Etzem. How do you know you touched Etzem? You can be in Kodesh HaKadosh, and then you can go home. And home doesn't only mean you walk into your house. Home means you're present in your home. You could be present in the mundane reality of another person and be there, connect to there. So you think, because this person is not so up there. No, because he's even more up there. There's going to heaven, and then there's going beyond heaven. We thought, what was the power of Yom Kippur? Going to heaven. So the Rebbe said, heaven is not closer to Yud Kei Vav Kei. He said, that's not Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is you go to heaven when you're on earth. How do you go to heaven when you're still on earth? This means you touched a place that transcends heaven and earth. And therefore, you could be in heaven and you could be on earth, and the two can become one, and none of them is compromised. That's a whole different art. That's where Etzem is translated in a person's life. Paradox does not scare me. Paradox comes from the Tzimtzum winning. Paradox even comes from pre-Tzimtzum winning. If Tzimtzum wins, I run to earth. If pre-Tzimtzum wins, I want to escape to infinity, like Nadav and Avihu. They never got married. The Gemara says Nadav and Avihu died. Why? They refused to get married. It also says they got drunk. It also says they went into Kodesh HaKadoshim. Which one was it? It's all the same thing. They went into Kodesh HaKadoshim because they wanted to be drunk, because they didn't want to get married. They wanted to be drunk on God. They weren't drunk from alcohol. They wanted to be drunk on Hashem. They were holy people. So why is it a sin? It's a sin because in the real Shema Etzem, there's fusion. Rabbi Akiva, it says, Nichnas b'shalom, v'yatza b'shalom. He went in and he went out, because by him going out was as holy as going in. I spoke Thursday, the Baal Shem Tov, it says about the Baal Shem Tov that he fasted many tanesim and he davened many tefillos, that Friday night, after his neshama went up during davening, the Baal Shem Tov would have aliyahs on neshama pretty often. His neshama went up, people go over to him in shul and ask him questions, My cow is having fever. What should I do? The Baal Shem Tov should be able to answer them even on Shabbos when his neshama is up. So the Rebbe once asked at a Fabreng in Yutas Kisov Tov Chav, why did he have to fast for this? Why couldn't he ask? Okay, when I come back down, I'll answer, right? He said, call me back tomorrow. Call me back tomorrow. No. He fasted that even Friday night after davening, when his neshama had an aliyah on neshama, and you come over to him and you say, there's a pothole on my street and, whatever, Baal Shem Tov should be able to tune in. Why was that important? Fakert, in our world, we're often very impressed by the person who's transcendent. It says, because the Baal Shem Tov understood that if you're dealing with atzmos, you have to be able to fuse the two. Because aliyah neshama is a gevaldik. Now, for us it's easy to say because we don't know what aliyah neshama is. I have no problem answering people a question Friday night. I also have no problem eating gefilte fish Friday night. You understand? You have aliyah neshama. And that's the story also, the famous story with Alter Rebbe Yom Kippur. Right, the famous story. He was in the middle of Kol Nidre with his talis, and he took off his talis and he left shul. It was in Liyazhna, in the shul. There was a woman who gave birth at the end of the shtetl, and the family left her because they wanted a Chap Yom Kippur davening. And the woman was in a very difficult situation. She was hungry, she was thirsty. And the Alter Rebbe went and he put up a fire and he cooked a soup and he fed her on Yom Kippur. So literally we see the story as, this is what you do. Pikuach nafesh is doichi Yom Kippur, it's not a problem. You make a fire and you feed a person because they have to eat. The Rebbe said the chiddush of the story is that the Alter Rebbe felt it in the middle of his dveikus of Yom Kippur. You're touching, every Jew Yom Kippur, you're a higher place. And it wasn't his wife. The family left, they thought. He said, in tachlis hadveikus, in Kodesh HaKadoshim, every Jew Yom Kippur is in a higher place. Certainly the Alter Rebbe on Yom Kippur. Der felt. He felt the pain of the Yeladus. And he said he took off his talis. Talis is prisu de malka. It says in Zohar that the talis is like Hashem hugging you. It's like the king, bedecking you from all sides. He removed the prisu de malka because he felt her pain. What's that nekuda? That nekuda is not, I'm a nice person. Yeah, you're a nice person. The vart is that there's dveikus and there's dveikus. There's dveikus in bli gvul. There's dveikus in ruchnius. There's dveikus in kav. Gevaldik. But when there's dveikus in etzem, then there's nimna nimnois, then there's no paradox anymore. Then, in the deepest place, my geschmack is to toivet hanayidin. To do a favor to a person. Either favor is I'm putting up a soup, or he's not teaching her up a chassidus. He's not enlightening her. He's putting up a soup. You can ask somebody else. Other people could make soup. You don't need Alter Rebbe to make soup. I don't even know he was probably he probably knew how to make soup also. Right? But over there, the soup and Yom Kippur are already, it's not a contradiction. But of course, she was allowed to eat the soup. It was an issue of her health. That's what the Magid means, Yom Kippur. It's not that it's Gabras Koyach Haruchni. It's Gabras Koyach Haruchni while he had a home and he had to go home. Basi Zuishta. That's a whole different word.
The gift of Yom Kippur is a human being that's tied to it.
So usually throughout the year, the focus is more on the material. Even Shabbos, we eat, we drink, but Yom Kippur, so to speak. Yeah, but like in every Yom Tif, Yom Kippur represents a paradigm, right? They say that there was a Yid, his son became a Kotzke chassid, and he was upset, so he came to Kotsk. He wanted to see what's happening there. So he asked one of the chassidim, when is Kol Nidre? He wanted to see, so they said, Ma'ariv is at 6 o'clock. So he was already in a bad mood. They call it Ma'ariv. He runs away, comes back Erev Pesach. He wants to see the Seder. He says, when is the Seder going to be? They say, dinner is going to be at 7. He plots. He goes into the cuts. He says, what type of people do you have here? Kol Nidre they call Maidiv, the Seder of Pesach they call supper, dinner. So he said, I teach my chassidim that every Maidiv is a Kol Nidre and every supper is a Seder. You know, when I heard the story, Erev Yom Kippur, Tavshin Nun Beis, was the last Erev Yom Kippur before the Rebbe had a stroke. So after Mincha, he turned around to the Gabi and he said to announce Maidiv. And I was perplexed, because usually the night of Yom Kippur you called Kol Nidre. So I asked an older person, a chassid there, so he told me the story. He said, the Kotzke said, I try to teach my disciples every Maidiv is a Kol Nidre and every supper is a Seder. Now, the Yom Kippur sets a paradigm. Yom Kippur, the Vart is a tremendous gili of Ruchnius, we all know. And yet, it's not Ruchnius that's transcendent. It's Ruchnius that infuses your home, infuses your body in space and in time and in the person. The Kohen Gadol had to be married. Kodesh HaKadoshim had a space, and Yom Kippur is a day. And in all three, there's fusion. And when there's fusion of paradox, that means the Etzem came out. And therefore he could say Yud Kei Vav Kei.
So it's like a suspension of the rules, or how does the mechanics?
Yeah. In physics today, quantum physics is all about paradox. You knew I would go there, right?
So you're going to lose me right now.
It's the arc.
I'm not going to discuss it. Huh?
The arc between the Shimu and the Kaf.
The arc, yeah. Now, in order to really appreciate this, you have to go through the ladder. We don't start with this. We start with the Ramak. You go to the Arizal, you go to the Baal Shem. You don't say this lightly. In other words, fusion of paradox can only come when you feel the paradox and the pain of it. If you don't feel the paradox, it's not fusion. It's delusion, not fusion. That was a poem. You understand? You have to feel the paradox. That's why sometimes people talk about these things and if you're not feeling the tension of all the Kabbalists were struggling with this. So don't just tell me, oh, everything is one. Thank you. There's a tension that's very deep, because there is a tension that's very deep. And I have to work through it. I really have to work through it. In my life, in our life, there is this tension. There's the tension between, if you want to use psychological terms, there's your conceptualized self and there's your truest self. Or some people would say there's the post-trauma self and the pre-trauma self. The self that's infinite and the self that's very, very restricted, extremely restricted. And people are trying to connect to that infinite self. And yet they're so bothered by the pain of not really having the ability to transcend that conceptualized self. But what if in the ultimate sense of reality, it's fusion that is really the deepest expression of reality? It's that ability to be able to remain l'cha'oida in a very stuck place and realize that the stuckness is just an opportunity to express the true infinity that doesn't have to be infinite, but it can even infuse a place of stuckness. Did you understand what I just said?
When you're saying stuckness, you mean picking up the garbage?
If that's your trauma, fine, but some of us deal with bigger stuff.
I'm just an example.
That's a good stuckness. That's nicht gefährlich. But I'm talking about even pain that I have to deal with, whether it's addiction, whether it's self-shame, self-guilt, inner wounds, deep wounds that are not easy and they don't go away. And I think that's very profound. If you can get rid of them, that's beautiful. But you can't always. So how do you look at it? So either you see it as an obstacle to overcome, you see it as an isayan. What we're learning here is Nimna HaNimnayis means that it's actually an opportunity to get in touch with Etzem. Because the Etzem can shine and come out everywhere, even in the most limited place, because over there the limit is not a real limitation. It's a channel for infinity that comes out through the limitation. And probably the model for this is, in many ways, what we often speak about, the story of Yosef. It says, V'Yosef hurad Mitzrayim. Yosef was lowered into Mitzrayim. So the Medrash says, hurad comes from the word V'yehered miyam ad yam, which means to be a king, to rule, an adain. Hashem tells Adam, pru urvu, uridu bidgas hayam. A roide is a ruler. It says about Mashiach, Yifrach b'yam of tzaddik, v'yerd, he will rule miyam, v'Yosef hurad Mitzrayim, means Yosef not was lowered into Egypt, Yosef became the ruler over Egypt. So the Rebbe once asked her, Yitzhak Kislev, he says, well, this is strange. At that point, he didn't become a ruler. He was sold as a slave. He was sold. Later, he became a ruler. It's not Yosef Hurad. What does the Medrash mean? It's cute, it's nice, but come on, that's not what it says. Hurad means the poor guy was a slave. He didn't even own himself. Forget about being a king. The guy didn't even own himself. He was a slave. And this is slavery 3,500 years ago. You understand? It's not slavery, I'm your employee. It's real slavery. The slaves of Egypt, you were a slave for life. You don't own yourself anymore. So he says, because there's a third pshat in Medrash. It says, "V'Yosef Hurad Mitzrayma." You could read Hoyrid, because there's no Nekudus, like La'olam, Hoyrid. Yosef Hoyrid. Yosef brought down the Shechina with him to Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe teaches like this, very deep. The same word. V'Yosef Hurad means Yosef was lowered. But how did he look at his being lowered? He never got stuck in the form of Yerida. He realized it's an opportunity to be Megala Einoid Mulvadai in this limited, confined space. How can he do this? Because Hoyrid is Hashchina. Because he was never detached. He was always aligned with the Shechina, with the Etzem. So therefore, wherever you are, even though he was lowered, it was just another form of leadership. Because you have to go inside in order to transform. I can't transform a situation from outside. So when I'm going in, if I get caught up by what's there, then I become defined by it. But if I go there as a shliach, if I go there like Atzmos goes there, then I don't get defined by it. So I'm completely in it, but I'm not defined by it, because it's just an opportunity to reveal the etzem, which confuse all the paradoxes and turn everything into one. So what does this mean in a person's life? It means, it means when we learn in Kabbalah or chassidus all the levels, they're all very real, but ultimately from our perception. What we're learning here is, can you look at every level from Atzmos' experience? And then the level, the gvul, bli gvul, it's not somewhere to get stuck. It's just a conduit for the Atzmos to shine through this. And therefore it's never paradoxical. It's never a contrast to anything else. Could you view the gvul and the bli gvul from the perspective of Atzmos? But you can't jump to that. If you just start talking about that, then okay, it's a little empty. There's gvul, there's bli gvul, there's all that. And then there is appreciating it from the point of etzem. So now let's see, just a few more moments, how he brings it all together with the Pardes and the Baal Shem Tov and a love Eloy Midaisov. Where did this come in here? It says, now we'll understand what the Alter Rebbe was trying to teach when he said, Kipshutai. A love is Kipshutai. Chas v'shalom, he was arguing with the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov says, not Kipshutai. So he says, V'zeu gam teichen teiras adman azaken binyan Hashem is the pidush dekoy ala atzbus nimna nimnoyas. We come now back to the Alter Rebbe who said that the Pardes said a love is oir. And the Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, said a love is kalim. The oir within the keli. And the pidush hapashat is a love is atzmus ein soif. It's Hashem himself. Or maybe the Pardes pidush shem oiris amaslapshim ba'kelim. As we explained. Baal Shem Tov pidush chayas hakelim atzmam kanal sev gimel. Or Messiah Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu here is the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe finishes pidush shekoyal atzmos. Shezeu amitis inyan a love eloy l'midaisov. What's a love? Not oy, not rishimu. Shua atzmos, the core of Hashem, nimna nimnoyis, who's not defined by any definition, including not by the definition that it has to have any form of definition, infinite or finite. Shezeu sheshem shamayim shagar b'fikah. This, the Alter Rebbe writes in Torah Vayed, is the idea that the name of Hashem is shagar. It's common in every Jewish mouth. children, adults, men, women, scholars, simpletons. Ayid says, the Eibishter, Baruch Hashem, Azay will der Eibishter, Dein Gott. Who is he talking to? Who is the 5-year-old talking about? He's talking about Svidus, he's talking about Kalim, he's talking about Atzilus, he's talking about Tzimtzum, he's talking about Kav. Who is he talking to? He's talking about Atzmos. So the 5-year-old doesn't know about the complexities of life. He doesn't know about the interface between infinity and finite, between the struggle of Kav and Rishimu. He doesn't know. He's a child. Who is he talking about? So you say he's a child. He says that child is actually talking about the essence. He's talking about that. That pre-sophistication is the place you want to reach post-sophistication. Of course, it's different. The 5-year-old is pre-everything. This is coming after everything, but it's the same nekuda. It's touching the purity of Atzmos that transcends any definition. Ve'inyan zeh chitche chassidus chabad. And this inyan was one of the main chidushim, emphasis, innovated, the Alter Rebbe, chassidus chabad. What meaning? V'hainu. The pirush ha'pardus shu klolos inyan ha'kabbalah hu sha'shemes ha'ma'oris. The pardus represents Kabbalah. The Ramak was considered one of the greatest Kabbalists in history, and his Sfarim tried to organize all of Kabbalah. So the Pardus tells us, what's Shemus? Who do we talk to? We talk to Oir. That's our experience of Hashem. You're talking to Oir. Oir is pretty good. Oir is Gilui Ein Sof. Oir is the revelation of infinity, like we discussed last week, the Kav. Toiris Chassidus HaKlalis, Chitche Shekai Al Chiyus HaKelim Atzmam Shalamayla Me'oris. The Baal Shem Tov represents Chassidus HaKlal. Chassidus means the general revelation of Chassidus that branches out into so many different holy groups, all the students of the Baal Shem Tov and their students. And the focus of Chassidus was to reveal the Chayus in the vessels themselves, meaning to reveal the Koyach HaEin Sof of the Gvul. Like we spoke last week, what was the Chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov? Ein Oid Mulvadai. The Rishimu. V'anoichi has to ask upon him to find the Anoichi in the finiteness of life. For the Baal Shem Tov, a relationship with Hashem was not only in heaven and transcendence. No, the Baal Shem Tov taught in eating and drinking and sleeping. Everything is kirvas alakim. Everything is devekas. Hashem said, God is Alt and Alt is God. And even in crisis and adversity, never think that God has abandoned you. You don't see anything? It's exactly the same presence. Even in Haster is Anoichi Haster Panei Bayemahu. That's the big focus of Chassidus. That's why it infused millions of Jews with such a geschmack. The Simcha and the Avos Yisrael. It's by revealing this, that the world has a soul. Even the most physical, the Baal Shem Tov says, everything has a soul, and creation is happening every moment. And Hashgacha Pratis, what's Hashgacha Pratis? A leaf turns over. It's also divine providence. Nothing happens by mistake. What did it do? It unified a person's life. In many ways, what is this? This is revealing the chiyus in the keli, in the geshem, in the gashmi, in the guf. That's the vart. And therefore, you in my office, there's a printer, and there should be a page on it. I think it's there. If it's not there, it's not there. Just wanted to know. So this is the second idea. The chayus of the keli is higher than her. Why? It says in Zohar, he and his oiris are one. He and his kalim are one. Which is deeper? So he says, the kala gavoya beyoser yered lamata mata beyoser. Whatever is higher goes down much lower. Because it's higher, it can descend to a much lower space. So the ihu that becomes one with the garmohi is deeper than the iyu that becomes one with chayahi. Again, chayahi is oir. That's the unity between the Ein Sof and the light of Hashem. Garmahi is the unity of Hashem and the kelim of Hashem. The structure, the container. One is the kav, one is the rishimu. In many ways, the rishimu, so to speak, is deeper than the kav. From our vocabulary perspective, of course. Not that it's all one, but from our vocabulary. Why? Because rishimu represents the ur hagvul that tzimtzum didn't affect. Remember what we learned back to last week, right? The kav was affected by tzimtzum. It had to leave and come back, and it competes with the tzimtzum. The rishimu never competes. The rishimu retains its pristine infinity because it's the ability of Hashem to be non-expressed. That's Iyuv v'Garmai. So Yored Lamata b'Yoser, because it's really deeper. In that sense, that's the chiddush of chassidus over Kabbalah. Kabbalah cherished transcendence. Gilui, Ein Sof. The Baal Shem Tov showed the Iyuv v'Garmai. A love Eloy L'Midaisav is find the God, find the infinity in the kalim, in the structures of life, in the containers of life, in the limitations of life, in the physicality of life, in every worm, in every blade of grass, in every heartbeat, in every flake of snow. And you'll see all the Torahs of the Baal Shem Tov revolve around this in one way or another. Celebrating the world, celebrating creation. Right? Everything is singing. There's a symphony, a divine symphony. And if you don't see it, it's even stronger. Because Kalim is the source of all limitations, including the limitations of adversity, of challenge, of struggle, of crisis. And that was the emunah that the Baal Shem Tov revealed. And it also speaks about who the Jew is, yourself. You look at your guf is not unholy. The Baal Shem Tov said you have to work with your guf, elevate your guf. Others said, no, mortify the body. The Baal Shem Tov didn't say, azav tazav imay. He said, when you see your donkey and it's crouching, don't abandon it. Help the donkey up. So the Baal Shem Tov said, what's the donkey? Chamor is chaymer, the guf, which is the ultimate product of Kalim. The guf, there's no neshama, there's a concealment. And it's crouching under the burden. It's not interested in Torah and mitzvahs. It's a lazy body. Azav tazav imay. You have to lift up the guf. Because we use Megala the Lakus, not only in the neshama, but also in the guf. That fusion, that integration, and this allowed Jews who were in Galus, downtrodden, dejected, to be able to become free, to be able to celebrate themselves as Jews. And in this way, the Baal Shem Tov also showed the unity of everybody. Because if the focus is on then some people are more in tune with less. If some people are more, some people are, but the focus is on Kalim. So sometimes fakir, the person whose shlichus is in a very physical way, not the spiritual saint or sage or Rosh Hashiva or big tzaddik, he expresses Hashem in a very unique and powerful way, sometimes in a deeper way. These are all contributions that chassidus introduces. So you have the Ramak, represents Kabbalah. Very unique in a maimer that the Rebbe should phrase it this way. So the Ramak says, what's a love? When you're davening, what's a love? You got to find the Ur in the Svidus. Don't get stuck in the Kalim, you got to go to the Ur. Which is generally, as he says, Bligvul. Pardes is Uris, light. Gilui of Ein Sof. And that's what Kabbalah tries to introduce, always. That's the focus of Kabbalah. We call it mysticism. Kabbalah and all of its manifestation. Of course, Kabbalah itself has so many different ways, and Mahalchim and Drachim, but the pardes that represents Klolos HaKabbalah, the focus was very much on Ur, not on Olam Haza Hagashmi. Olam Haza Hagashmi is the world. We have to be in the world, but it's always to connect to the Ein Sof in the world, to the Yechudim, to the Shemas, always the Ruchnius, very, very deep. And the Baal Shem Tov really taught us the Kalim. And the Rebbe says, V'chidish adman hazaken b'chassidus chabad. Then the Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to tell you the Pirush HaPoshet. Is he arguing with the Pardes? He's arguing with the Baal Shem Tov. No, the Alter Rebbe couldn't argue with the Baal Shem Tov. It was his Rebbe, Cholik al-Rabbi, especially about this. He says, the Chiddush, the Alter Rebbe was emphasizing Shekoy ala Atzmos. When the Rebbe said this Mitzvah Shabbos, this Maimer, he said, the Alter Rebbe was trying to explain the etzem of the Pardes and the etzem of the Baal Shem Tov. He was trying to articulate the core from where the Pardes is explaining his Nakuda and from where the Baal Shem Tov is explaining his Nakuda. And there they can come together. Shekaya la atzmus nimna nimnois. A love is going on atzmus, the core of everything. Atzmus is the essence of Hashem himself. Nimna nimnois, who's prevented from being prevented. Because that's the only thing that could connect Iyu and Garmohi. The ability to really be able to connect to Garmohi, Iyu is Hashem himself, and Garmohi is the structures of the world, Kalim. How can they really connect? We explained that Kalim come from Rishimu. Kalim come from Rishimu because Rishimu is the Koyach HaGvul. So it allows there to be concealment. Because Koyach HaGvul allows finiteness, so there could be concealment. Can the Iyu be really connected with Garmohi? When we experience Kalim, we experience the concealment. The Baal Shem Tov is saying, really, that concealment is an articulation of the Koyach HaGvul of Ein Sof. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, the real unity of Iyu and Garmohi, the real unity of Iyu and Garmohi, and as he said in the B'tzoi Shabbos Maimer, and the real unity of Iyu and Chayoi, can come from Atzmos. In other words, because Atzmos is completely undefined, therefore, the Ihu, the essence, can be completely one with the finite. The essence can even be completely one with the light, which is infinite, because light is also not Atzmos.
It's not Atzmos, light is not,
No. Light is the revelation, but the moment it's revealed, it's articulated as infinite. It's much closer than Kalim, because it's Megala Ein Sof. But that's the chiddush that Alter Rebbe was saying, that Oir is not Atzmos. And because Oir is not Atzmos, so the tension between Oir and Keli is because you didn't bring in Atzmos. When you bring in Atzmos, then Oir and Keli will not have tension anymore. So the Pardes and the Baal Shem Tov are experienced by us as two streams of consciousness because we didn't bring in Atzmos. He said the moment we're bringing Atzmos, go to the Pirush HaPoshet. Poshet, he means simple, not just simple. Simple as Poshet, it's completely undefined. Pshittus, which the simple Jew gets. The simple Jew says Hashem, the Eibishter, he's talking about Atzmos. That's the B'chol Kareinu, a love, Atzmos. Krevim, a love, Etzem HaNeshama. The Etzem HaNeshama is one with Atzmos. And over there's no tension of Eir and Keli anymore. So it's not a contradiction, Chas v'Shalom, to the Pardes and the Baal Shem Tov. It's the Etzem of the Pardes, it's the Etzem of the Baal Shem Tov. You can experience Eir as Eir, you can experience Keli as Keli, you can experience Eir as a manifestation of Atzmos and Keli as a manifestation of Atzmos, and then Eiris and Kelim come together. Iyu is one with Garmoyi, and Iyu is one with Chayoi, and Chayoi and Garmoyi are both one with Iyu and with each other.
Iyu is
Atzmos. Iyu is Hashem himself. Yeah.
How do you translate Iyu Machaber is Iyu Garmoyi?
In other words, to be able to really connect Iyu with Garmoyi, that the Ein Sof should be felt in the Keli, because by definition we're saying it can't be felt in the Keli. The way it's felt in the Keli is by not being felt. What was one of the big inyanim of the Alter Rebbe is chassidus chabad, that what? It's not just celebrating the physical world and knowing Einoid Malvadai, but really that within the structures of your mind and your heart, you should be able to experience Einoid Malvadi in an internalized fashion. For that, you have to go into the nitty-gritty of the Kalim. And some of his colleagues criticized him for this. They said, much better Amunah, much better faith. Alter Rebbe said Amunah could be makif. It could be a little superficial, meaning it doesn't really permeate you as a person. It could be. By the tzaddik, it permeates him. The chassid looks at the tzaddik and gets inspired, but his own inner nefesh habahamis and guf was never worked through. Like it says in my Gemara, the Alter Rebbe says that Emunah could be a little makif. What do we mean by makif? The Gemara says that a ganev, before he steals, he prays to Hashem. If he prays to Hashem to be successful, so why are you stealing? The answer is, I believe in God, I believe in God, but I have to make a living. Yeah. So sometimes the relationship of Emunah could be one that it hovers over you and it defines you, right? It's identity. But to be able to really live with it on a day-to-day basis, that it permeates you, that you really get it, it becomes a derech of life in a way that permeates as an individual. As an individual, you breathe it, you live it. For this, you really have to understand it to the best of your ability, grasp it, Feel it, breathe it. In other words, you have to bring it in mamish to the limits of Kalim. People said to the Alter Rebbe, you can't do this. Emunah. Why they say you can't do it? They're right. Because you're going down into Gvul, you're going to lose touch. That's only if what? If you don't have the etzem of Pnimi Satayra. If you have the etzem of the Baal Shem Tov. Then the Kohen Gadol could be Beisizu Ishtay and Fakert. He touches the etzem when it permeates all of the pratim. Well, how do you know that it's etzem? The etzem means there's no place that's divorced of it. So therefore, you could permeate every nekuda of a person's life and retain that purity. Yeah. On the other hand, the same is true when it comes to Eir. Yeah. Sometimes when a person lives in Kalim, what's missing is the Gilui. And because what's missing is the Gilui, the revelation of it is not so clear. You could sometimes end up a little bit in a state of concealment. You say, V'anoichi haster aster. There's a noichi in haster aster. But can you see the anoichi in haster aster? The ability to really be able to fuse Eir and Keli, to fuse Gilui and Helim. That in the Eir should be able to come into Kalim, and not just generally, but specifically. And in the Keli, you should be able to experience the Bli Gvul of Eir. There should be the complete fusion of the two. For this, he says, you need the Elav, which is the Etzem of Ein Sof. That's like Yosef, Hurad Mitzrayim. He goes into the lowest places, but from the perspective of Etzem, it's just another channel for that absolute infinity, for that absolute fusion.
They talk about the four sages who go into...
the four sages, yeah.
So...
In Chagiga. So Elisha ben Avuya became a heretic. Ben Azai died. Ben Zayma, it says, it affected his mind, his sanity. And Rabbi Akiva went in peace and came out in peace. That's an example of the fusion. Rabbi Akiva, nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom.
But the paradox is that you have to go in and view all of them.
Yeah. They went in and they couldn't come out. Couldn't come out the same like before. It was too overwhelming. You know, it's a different state of consciousness. You never come back. The reason, you could come back is either because you weren't there, or you forget about it. The chiddush in this mimer is that when he came back, it wasn't because he wasn't there. It's because he went in even to a deeper place.
Should we be attempting to go there? Should we be attempting to go there?
Well, like all of these concepts, it applies to every person where they are. In other words, every person has their shlichus, right? Where you are, what type of soul you have, what type of mind you have, what type of heart you have, what your shlichus in the world is. But the point here is, that's the Alter Rebbe's point, that the simple Jew who speaks about Hashem in that pshittus without knowing any of this, what is he talking about? He's connecting to that nekuda. And that nekuda, there's a famous lashon in Shal Shuvas HaRivosh. He brings from one of the Rishonim who said, Ani mispalel adaza hatinik. When I daven, I want to be like a child. Ani mispalel adaza hatinik. What is he saying? That after everything, names, children don't know about names and svidus. They know Hashem himself. Hashem is one. So what do you need all of this for? So just go back to that. The vart is, as we grow up, and we live in a world of concealment, and we live in a world where we don't experience God, and we don't experience ourselves, and we live in a world of pain, and we live in a world of disillusionment, and challenge, and crisis, and adversity. How do we connect the two? What's ultimately the avodah? Is it escapism? Is it becoming intensely involved in the world and forgetting about, higher visions? What is it? Who gives? Who yields? And that remains a serious nigud. It could be a serious opposition. So he says, no, we got to go. Alter Rebbe says, go back to that nikuda of a love. And essentially, this is ultimately the nikuda of the paradis. This is the etzem of the paradis, and this is the etzem of the Baal Shem Tov. And that's why Ihu and Garmayi could really become one, because is it possible that the Keli, as being a Keli, should experience the Eir HaGvul as a Keli in a revealed way? Can Eir and Keli really become one? In other words, can the finite truly become a channel for the infinite? Or no? The Baal Shem Tov said, let's focus on the finite and celebrate life. The Kabbalists said, let's escape into heaven. And one has to give. Listen, either you celebrate life, either you love people, or you love God. Which one is it? Which one is it? So the Alter Rebbe said, Yom Kippur, in middle of Kol Nidre, with your talis, you there feel the pain of a Yeladus. The Moira Naim, I think, writes, the Bracham Shanabla, Moira, he says that the three guests came. So Avram says, Alna Savim Alavdech, Hashem, don't leave me. Hashem is running away. Hashem, leave me, don't leave me. Where's God going? He's going to Hawaii? Where's God going? I thought God is everywhere and everything. Alna Savim Alavdech, don't leave me when I'm treating the guest, when I'm feeding the guest. I should never think that I'm detached from you. Don't allow me to step away from the hergish of Innate Mulvadi when I'm giving mustard to my 3 Arab guests. I should remain in that state of oneness. Like the Baal Shem Tov said, Friday night, after Aliyah Sanasham, I should be in that space. Can the keli itself become a keli for Erd Habligvul? No, Kav is Kav, Rishimu is Rishimu. Alter Rebbe said no. Ultimately, Kav and Rishimu are one. But they're not one. If they were one, so then what does that result get into the whole problem? Because this is what we're working through. This is what you have to work through in your life. If you don't feel every step of the way, the child touches atzmos. But then life moves on. There's 2 types of ignorance. There's ignorance before you know everything, and there's ignorance after you know everything. It's very different, right? One is you don't know anything, and one at the end we say we don't know. So why do we start? There's ignorance pre-knowledge, and then there's ignorance post-knowledge. You know what you don't know, you know why you don't know, which means your ignorance is enlightened. It's a difference, I don't know, right? In Eitz Chaim, there's a shar called Shar HaSveikis. The portal of doubt. So that everyone said out of Fabrengen, he said, I heard from my father, who was a big Mekober, a Bleivik. He says, wie kommt Sveikes in Eitz Chaim? I said, Al results. Portal of doubts? It's results. He says, my father told me it's the suffix shalamayla miyadiyah. It's the ignorance that transcends knowledge. Reisha de lo yisyad. After all the knowledge, you come to a place that's beyond knowledge.
You gotta work through the boredom.
The boredom.
The boredom, yeah, because it's like, whenever you're gonna get stuck in either one, it kind of becomes boredom. But that's an experience.
We want to it's easier to get stuck because it becomes a comfort zone. This one runs into heaven, this one runs into earth, it becomes my comfort zone. When you can live in the tension between the two,
right?
That's where you touch the essence. And that's where life happens, and that's where there's no tension anymore. You do it with a simcha. So you'll see all the chassidus of the Alter Rebbe, the whole chassidus chabad, is always leading to this. There's my modem about Oyd, my modem about Caleb, my modem about Oylemis, Lamayla Oylemis, Kav, Rishimu, Bli, Gvul, Gvul, Neshama, Guf. But ultimately, to go to the place of Etzem, where it's not just there's no place devoid of God with Amunah, but to be able to actually experience that the Geder of the Keli is Ein Sof. Iyuvigarmai. Usually, what's the connection of Koyach HaGvul to Keli? Concealment. And you say, in the concealment, Hashem is here. But to be able to transform the concealment itself as a channel for infinity, V'yosef Hurad Mitzrayimah.
Say it's a place where the Rishimu touches the Kav. It's where they meet.
That's where Kav and Rishimu touch you.
That's where they meet.
Yeah. No, it's the way Atzmus. It's the Atzmus. It's the. And that's by Yoimahu Hashem Echad or Shmo Echad. What's going to be Mashiach? What's Pshat? Shmo Echad. Hashem's name will be one. Why? We're all going to go to heaven. We're all going to go to heaven. No. When Mashiach is going to come, we're going to see that Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, and Yud Kei Vav Kei We're always one. Ushma Echad is now also. When I experience Yud Kei Vav Kei, I'm experiencing back to relationships. When I'm experiencing your name, in my experience, I separate it from you. And in my own experience, I separate my name from me. In the ultimate unity, and this is the ultimate healing where you have to bring your patience to, is that when you experience your name, you should be able to experience yourself. There should be full alignment. All trauma comes, the need to disassociate your external self with your internal self, because it's too painful. So your internal self had to go into hiding. You understand what I'm saying? Your internal self had to go into hiding because it's too painful, and I create a disassociation. That's what trauma is. But if I can heal Kavan Rishimu, I can heal all trauma. Because all trauma comes from the too much Koyach HaGvul, too much concealment of self. Right?
What's abandoned?
That's abandonment. What Kaylee feels abandoned. I'm alone. That's the chalal. Here, look at this poor circle. Would you feel abandoned? This is the source of abandonment. And look at the Ma'aran. Reb Nachman has a whole piece about this. The Alter Rebbe held, Baal Shem Tov held Tzimtzum Shaloi Kipshutai. Right? So actually in his comments on Tanya, the Rebbe references this Likutei Moharan for Reb Nachman of Breslov. He says you feel alone in the world, but really you know that you're not alone. The Ein Sof is there. The Ein Sof is there. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that so powerfully. God, the Rishimu was there. But the Alter Rebbe wanted to reveal that itself. To be able to really live with it, and live with it in a way that's integrated in a person's day-to-day character and personality. That's why his focus was Chachma Bina Das. You should really become part of the structure of life. So that even when I'm completely involved in Keli, I could touch the Ihu. Reb Levi, du verstehst? So what's Shema Echad? Shema Echad is going to reveal that Adna and Yud Kei Vav Kei are not separated. It's a channel back to my V'yosef Hurad. The finite is a channel to be able to reveal Etzem, because Etzem is Nimna Nimnaya. So Amela, you're dealing with a finite situation. Yeah, you are. You're dealing with a difficult situation. What is it, Be'etzem? From a place of Atzmos, what is it? It's the ability to reveal the pure, undefined essence in this place. Because when you come to the essence, there's all fusion. There's nothing that's excluded. And therefore, only here can you reveal the Etzem. If you run away from it, you're not going to be revealing the Etzem. You won't be touching your own essence. Whenever you touch essence, you remain present in every situation. You don't run. You remain completely present. I run because of the pain, right? So I have to amputate. I have to amputate myself. I'm just trying to show how it has ramifications on a lot of different levels. And the same is true of Avodas Hashem. This is the recipe to change the world. Einoid Milvadai. There's no Jew who's excluded. You say he's too far. He's too far from your own perception. He's not too far. And that's already what the Baal Shem Tov tried to bring in with chassidus, that there's no such a thing too far. Nobody is too distant. Nobody is too distant.
You say this is why the Alter Rebbe, of all the mystics and Kabbalists, were also like Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah. That's the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch is the chibur of Eir and Keli. The structure of halach is all about structure. Kabbalah and chassidus is trying to escape structure. That was the tension between the chassidim and those who opposed chassidim, right? Structure, limits, everything has a time and a space. Huh? Chassidim wanted bli gvul. Who's right? Elu ve'elu. What's Yiddishkeit? Is Yiddishkeit finite or is Yiddishkeit infinite? Some say it's all about finite. There's Zman Krishma, Zman Tefillah, Shabbos, Yom Tov, time to learn, time. Everything is time. You come into certain shuls, right? Decorum. Chassidim is more, verbringen. We all know it's different. Me zingt, me tanzt, me verbringt, and you give me a l'chaim. And I was the other day by davening a minyan, so one guy was singing a whole davening, the chazan. So another guy at the end says, it's after the churban, you're not supposed to sing so much. So they started a whole argument. He says, you're living Nebuch in a Gehenna, in a depression, you love Tisha B'Av. Okay, so, he was taking a little bit to the extreme, but the concept to get is, there's a Judaism that's very finite. And that is real Yiddishkeit. Zman Krishma is Yiddishkeit, Zman Tefillah is Yiddishkeit. Time is time. We started over the Maimah that Sava means time. Being in an army, you got to be on time. If you're not on time, is just a bohemian is not going to fit with Shulchan Aruch. An uninhibited, free spirit. And then other people say, I'm dry, I'm dead, I'm numb. Give me, let's take out the guitars and start dancing. So the Baal Shem Tov was such a fresh of breath air, because it infused that chiyus. But the same people say, oh, you're going to destroy halacha. This was the tension. So you see by the Alter Rebbe so much the fusion of the two. In the Shulchan Aruch, you see the real Litvak. And not Stam, Kuntrus Achem in his Shulchan Aruch. And all is Maimonim. On the other hand, absolute Bli Gvul, absolute infinity. How does that happen? Because there was no tension. Because in Atzmos, the etzem of the Baal Shem Tov, the Gili of etzem, this complete fusion. In the finite, you see the infinity. And absolute infinity could be channeled down into the most finite detail. Yeah. Wait. Thank you everybody for coming, for joining us, for gracing us. And Be'ezer Hashem will continue next Sunday. So what does this mean practically, the Bara? Summation in 3 sentences. Ein kiddush ala b'makom suda. Yeah. You're never ever divorced from the essence, ever. And the deepest Bli Gvul could come out into the smallest Gvul. And even the smallest Gvul is associated with the deepest Bli Gvul.
There's a lot of Lamaisa in the shir this morning. A lot of Lamaisa.
Okay. You typhus a little bit.
Everything.
You typhus everything.
No room for growth at all.
No room for growth at all.
Got it all.
You typhus? Huh? You hear the word of the Maggid, how he turns over the word of the Maggid, huh? Everybody thinks the Maggid says Ruchni. He says no, it's because...
You're there. Mendel, you're there, man.
It's missing.
Oh, Tati and Shakayach, thank you very much.
Okay, Mendel, you understood?
A bit, yeah. I guess, whatever. So I guess Hawaii is the Etzem, able to come through the Alter Rebbe to Hawaii.